During the birth of Soviet Russia, holding office as a politician was a dangerous occupation. One man, known for his ruthlessness and brutal enforcement, served as a key member of the Stalin administration, leaving behind him a wake of death and destruction, which earned him the epithet the Architect of Terror. Although he was a man of modest origins, he would soon rise to become one of the most powerful figures in the USSR, a position he attained through his cunning and his use of brutal force. However, he was not immune to the Red Terror that was the Soviet Union, and his eventual fate would be dictated by the political turmoil which followed the death of Joseph Stalin, one of the 20th century's most ruthless dictators. He would eventually pay for his crimes with his life at the behest of the communist leadership in Russia. The man's name, Lavrentiy Beria, the longest-serving head of the Russian secret police. The man known to history as Lavrentiy Pavlovich Beria was born on the 17th of March 1899 in the village of Merkheli near Sukhumi in present-day Georgia, which was then part of the Russian Empire. He was born into a land-owning family within the Abkhazia region. His father was Pavel Khrushchevich Beria, of Mingrelian ethnic origin, a people native to Georgia and the South Caucasus, and considered distinct from other ethnicities in the region. His mother was Marta Jakeli, of the Jakeli family, who belonged to the feudal house of Dadiani in western Georgia, and who were related to the princes of Mingrelia. Marta was a widow and had another son prior to marrying Beria's father, with whom she had another 3 children. She was known as a pious woman who was heavily influenced by the Georgian Orthodox Church, and as such had strong ties within the local religious community, something that she also instilled in her children. Beria grew up as a peasant in an area that was influenced considerably by the Romano-Byzantine and Romano-Greek worlds, rather than the Slavic, Russo, Turkish, or Persian traditions of neighboring regions. He was said to have had a full brother born to both his parents, and yet, according to the Russian government, he had only one sister, Anna, who was deaf, and 2 nieces who were dependent upon him, suggesting perhaps that his brother had either died or else he no longer maintained a close relationship with him. In high school, Beria successfully studied maths and the natural sciences, and while there, he was given the nickname Detective, due, apparently, to his skill in retrieving stolen items for pupils and teachers. He was also accused, however, of hiding the items himself, perhaps to manipulate others into believing in his good nature, displaying at a young age an ability to manipulate the emotions of others. He graduated from the Baku Polytechnical School for Mechanical Construction in 1919, where he was viewed as a mediocre student. He later claimed that he had become politically active after joining the Bolshevik cause in 1917, whilst still a student. In 1919, at the age of 20, he gained a position within the security service of the Azerbaijan Democratic Republic, and the state surveillance operations that he carried out marked the beginning of his ascent into the upper tiers of Russian government. It was said that Beria did not share the same Marxist-Leninist ideology as his comrades, but he nonetheless became a supporter of Stalin's regime, perhaps in part because they were both raised in Georgia, something that the Russian dictator may later have seen as an asset, since they were the only senior members of the Soviet government from that republic. His increasing political activity came at a time of growing instability across Europe, following the trauma of the First World War and the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian, German, and Ottoman empires, the redrawing of borders, and the emergence of new nations. Closer to home, there had been growing discontent in Russia at the ineffective rule of Tsar Nicholas II, and memories of the horrific Russian losses in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 were still fresh. The war had been initiated by the Tsar himself in the face of Japan's imperial expansion in Asia. At a planned peaceful demonstration in January 1905, the Tsar's officers fatally wounded participants in what became known as the Bloody Sunday Massacre, which took place close to the Winter Palace, Tsar Nicholas's residence in St. Petersburg. This incident led to unrest throughout the remainder of 1905, with peasants, workers, and military personnel all rebelling against the ruling classes. Then, in 1906, a Russian parliament, the Duma, was formed under a new Russian constitution, which gave greater rights to commoners. However, the Tsar had ceded only a nominal amount of power in order to shore up his weakening empire, and he still wielded a great deal of authority. Surrounded by corrupt and incompetent advisors, the people found the situation too much to tolerate. Tsar Nicholas II abdicated in February 1917, ending centuries of rule by the Romanovs. Russia descended into civil war, with Vladimir Lenin's Bolsheviks overthrowing a provisional government later that year and establishing a socialist regime. The Bolsheviks ultimately emerged victorious, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, was formed in December 1922. Russia was a difficult country to govern due to the size of the empire and the wide range of nationalities and ethnicities, each with their own regional traditions, thus preventing an overarching Russian national identity to emerge. And so unity as a nation proved difficult to achieve. At the time of Beria's birth, Georgia had become a hotbed of political activity. However, despite being a client state of its more mighty northern neighbor, it largely favored a transition from an autocracy to democracy. Following the Bolshevik parliamentary coup of 1917, Georgia had refused to recognize the new regime, and 2 years after the October Revolution, the country remained in an unpredictable situation regarding the issue of the sovereignty of Russia over Georgia. It faced political intervention from both the Kemalism movement in post-Ottoman Turkey and from Bolshevism in Russia, which Georgia saw as a threat to its autonomy and had even lost the coastal port of Batumi for a short period to the Turks. In the wake of the German-Russo Pact, which followed in 1918, Georgia and the rest of Transcaucasia was left alone to arrange their own political affairs. But they were now vulnerable to the volatility of regional power politics, and so in that same year, Georgia joined the Transcaucasian Democratic Federative Republic, a geopolitical agreement that included its southern neighbors Azerbaijan and Armenia. The entity had been created to strengthen the region, yet the republic only lasted a month due to disunity between the three countries. Georgia claimed its autonomy on the 26th of May 1918, the first time in 116 years that the country had been fully independent, with the Social Democratic Mensheviks being the politically dominant party in the country. The Mensheviks favored land reform whilst also retaining the national identity of the country and avoiding a revolution similar to the one which had occurred in Russia to the north. Despite dispersing pockets of resistance across the country and engaging in the Georgian-Armenian War, Georgia was ultimately unable to prevent itself from being consumed by the massive Russian state. Despite Russia's recognition of Georgia as a country in 1920, Stalin led the Bolsheviks in invading the small Eurasian state in 1921, which resulted in Georgia losing the sovereign status it had briefly held and transforming it into a new Soviet constituent known as the Georgian Soviet Socialist Republic. At that time, Bolshevik domination in Russia became supreme. Vladimir Lenin had emerged as the founding father of Soviet Russia, and the Communist Party had moved to arrange the assassination of the Romanov family. In 1922, Lenin and the man who would eventually succeed him, Joseph Stalin, disagreed on the fate of the Transcaucasian state, in what became known as the Georgian Affair, with the former suggesting that Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia should become semi-independent within the Russian Soviet, whilst Stalin and Beria wished to fully incorporate the region into Russia itself. In May of 1922, Lenin suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed, and although he remained active politically, he did not retain the power needed to run the state at the same level that he had done previously. During the latter part of that year, Stalin became the General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, officially taking over as the new leader of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. By this time, Lenin had suffered 2 strokes, with a third occurring in March 1923. And although there had been a positive prognosis after a slight recovery, he died on the 21st of January 1924, leaving behind a new Russian landscape that was to last until the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Beria's life mirrored the confusion of the times. By 1920, Beria was no longer an undercover agent and had begun working for the Baku Customs House in Azerbaijan. In April that year, the Red Army captured the city and he was arrested. With the support of his contemporaries, the Central Committee of the Azerbaijan Bolsheviks saved Beria from execution when he faced charges of spying on the ruling party, even though it was not uncommon for junior members of the movement to be asked to spy on their enemies, and so this may have confirmed his innocence in the eyes of the party. While he was in prison, he formed a romantic connection with his cellmate's niece, Nina Gegechkuri, who was 17 at the time and a trained scientist, and the two eloped on a train once Beria was released. They would marry in 1921 and have a son together called Sergio, who later became a writer. Back in Georgia, he was soon arrested again, this time alongside the entire Georgian Bolshevik Central Committee for spying on the Menshevik government and for setting up secret contacts with enemy politicians. He was subsequently released into exile with instructions to leave Georgia within 3 days. But Beria refused and remained in Tbilisi, taking on a secret identity and working for the Russian embassy. Around this time, he enlisted in the Cheka, the first Bolshevik secret police organization, and he became the deputy head of the Georgian branch of the organization in 1922. In 1924, during the Georgian nationalist uprising, he played a role in the arrest and execution of an estimated 10,000 political opponents of the Russians. To end the rebellion, Beria had advised the political prisoners that they should inform their counter-revolutionaries to abandon their objectives and put down their weapons, so the mass executions of their comrades would come to an immediate end. But his promises would not be kept, and armed raids soon followed, wiping out entire civilian communities. He was awarded the Order of the Red Banner for what was seen as his ruthless efficiency, and made the head of the political division of the Transcaucasian OGPU, the successor to Cheka. Georgia subsequently became a Soviet Socialist Republic. Beria became the head of the Georgian OGPU in 1926, which facilitated his association with the communist leader and the fellow Georgian Joseph Stalin. Beria now began to provide security details to the Communist Party leader Joseph Stalin as he traveled more frequently to Georgia, allowing their personal relationship to grow. In 1925, both Stalin and Beria became caught up in controversy when the leader of the Transcaucasian Cheka, also a proud Trotskyist, Solomon Mogilyevsky, and 2 senior officials died in a plane crash following the detonation of an explosive device on the aircraft in which they were traveling. Rumors suggested that Mogilyevsky had information on Beria and Stalin that could effectively harm their political reputations, but a resulting internal investigation cleared both of their names, and they would escape unpunished due to the inadequate evidence linking them to a crime that even prominent Soviet politician Leon Trotsky did not believe they were responsible for. At the time of the incident, Trotsky had reported that there had been 3 anti-Stalinist officials on the way to visit him, and it was possible that Beria and Stalin took the opportunity to eliminate the opposition. Beria also using this as a chance not only for promotion, but also to forge a deeper relationship with his superior. Beria impressed Stalin, and soon he joined the Joint State Political Directorate under the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR, overseeing the Georgian region. As his power grew, he began to attract unwanted attention and was increasingly viewed with suspicion, often disliked by those around him. By 1927, almost 10 years after the Bolshevik Revolution, Beria was promoted to a position on the Georgian Central Committee, continuing to fight anti-state terrorism and even punishing civilians for what was termed national chauvinism when expressing nationalistic traditions inconsistent with the communist government's stance. By virtue of his position as an intelligence agent, Beria had considerable leverage and an easy route to the Russian capital. This was evident in his correspondence with the prominent Communist Party official Grigory Orjonikidze, to whom he passed on illicit information about his once trusted colleagues after growing wary of their intentions. In 1931, Beria became the head of the Joint State Police Directorate, a position he achieved by muscling out his opposition, giving him the ability to keep close tabs on any information that may have harmed him, often shutting down investigations before they could tarnish his image. Stalin also made him second secretary of the Georgian Communist Party Central Committee and of the Transcaucasian Party. He was soon hitting the headlines and was reported on the front page of the Zaria Vostoka newspaper in Georgia, addressing the country's collectivization policies. During his first appearance as party chief, he blamed the previous leader, Lavrentiy Beria, for failing to carry out government orders while using the volatile situation to justify violent measures to overcome his opposition. 2.5 weeks later, he once again used his newly acquired position to call out former party members for the underperforming Transcaucasian economy. And he also took the opportunity to speak about class vigilance and class awareness, which he believed was why the region was doing so poorly. During his speeches, Beria would speak positively about Stalin, likely using this as a means of securing a route to the Kremlin, and over the next 4 years proceeded to remove the old Bolshevik grip on Georgia. During his term, Beria instigated further reforms of the kolkhoz program, which was the collectivization of agriculture in farming communities, including the political suppression of the better-off farmers known as kulaks and anyone else opposing Bolshevism, sending at least 335 kulak families into exile, whilst also equalizing workers' wages. It is clear that Beria achieved some of his objectives using devious tactics, and he soon forced Soviet politician Mamir Orekhalashvili out of his job as the chief of the Transcaucasian Party, and then offered him a transfer to Moscow to take a demotion as the deputy chief of the Institute of Marxism-Leninism. During this period, Beria assumed Orekhalashvili's job and soon took control of the Georgian party leadership in 1934, and once again began overseeing the entire South Caucasus region while he continued to work on his next promotion, a move to the Kremlin in Moscow. In 1937, Beria was responsible for carrying out the purge of the Georgian NKVD secret services, where up to 17 high-ranking officials were tried and executed for being part of an underground anti-Bolshevik movement associated with Polikarp Mdivani, who was responsible, in part, for the anti-Stalinist movement in Transcaucasia. Noticing his leadership style and ruthlessness, in 1938, Stalin appointed Beria as a deputy member of the Russian secret police, also known as the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, later the KGB, due to his meticulous planning skills and execution of government-led operations. Beria also played a major role in Stalin's political purge, when approximately 40% of the ruling elite were killed by Stalin's agents, with only 35% of party members surviving to old age or dying of illness, making it safe to say that Beria enjoyed greater freedom within the party than his contemporaries. And yet, he soon found himself on the NKVD hit list and only survived by asking for Stalin's forgiveness. The Great Purge also saw the persecution of public figures such as scientists, engineers, and police officers who did not follow the state's extremist ideology, even extending the wrath of the Red Terror to ethnic persecution. By December 1938, Beria was made leader of the NKVD upon the demise of his predecessor and General Commissar, Nikolai Yezhov. In the wake of Stalin's purge, and through the influence of Beria himself, Yezhov was removed from office and executed in February 1940 due to his alleged counter-revolutionary activities, which implicated his family members and close associates. Perhaps the most high-profile assassination to occur under Stalin and Beria was the August 1940 assassination of Leon Trotsky, who was exiled to Turkey in 1929 and later relocated with his wife to Coyoacan in Mexico City, where, under armed guard, the architect of the Russian Revolution and close ally of the late Lenin was murdered by Spanish communist and NKVD officer Ramon Mercader. In 1941, Beria became the second most powerful man in Russia when he was made deputy prime minister, and he soon became infamous for his involvement in kidnappings, rape, and torture. He was often referred to as our Heinrich Himmler by the Russian dictator himself, comparing him to the leader of the German Nazi group the Gestapo, even introducing him to US President Franklin D. Roosevelt in this manner during their diplomatic conference in November of 1943. As Beria rose to prominence, testimony by labor camp prisoners recounted that gulags had existed before Beria's arrival, but expanded significantly under his direction. Hence his comparison to Himmler of the Nazi Party, as well as his fierce and hostile reprisals in response to those who dared to oppose Leninist and Stalinist traditions in Russia. In 1938, Russia had again entered into conflict with Japan after they extended their control onto mainland Asia in Mongolia. They were soon forced to retreat in 1939 and entered into a treaty with the Russians, forcing Japan to temporarily abandon their imperialist objectives. The Japanese retreat on the Eastern Front saw the land border with Russia restored, and Beria became responsible for the mass deportations of enemy soldiers, resulting in the massacre and deaths of many enemy troops. On the eve of the Second World War, the Soviet Union entered into a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany and turned its attention to Finland, invading in November 1939 on the pretext of defending its democratic institutions from a clique of fascists. Stalin had expected an easy victory in what became known as the Winter War, but the Red Army was met with staunch resistance, resulting in the deaths of up to 200,000 Bolshevik fighters. Beria and the NKVD were sent to police Bolshevik soldiers who deserted the battlefield and to protect the regional border that sat close to the front lines. By 1940, Stalin had turned his attention to Romania, annexing both Bessarabia and northern Bukovina, where Beria was responsible for the transportation of political opposition into the gulags, where they were subjected to a regime of intense labor, which proved to be something of an asset to the country in the race against Germany to increase their military might. When military objectives soon expanded into Poland, Beria himself was responsible for the killing of Polish troops in Katyn, with thousands of officers meeting their end at the hands of the NKVD. Between 1939 and 1941, the Soviets deported Polish nationals from the eastern part of the country into the inhospitable lands of Siberia, a journey sometimes referred to as the Siberian Odyssey, which was responsible for the deaths of at least 400,000 Poles in what can only be described as a tragic example of ethnic cleansing. Facing the German front, Stalin remained confident in the face of Hitler's advance, believing that Hitler would not attack Russia. But at this point, France had collapsed under a Nazi invasion and the British had retreated from the continent. However, Stalin failed to heed the advice of both British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and his own intelligence agents, and Russia was later attacked. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Non-Aggression Pact, signed in 1939, had simply stalled a German attack. But Germany made an advance on Russia in June 1941. Later that year, around 3.5 million Axis troops invaded the USSR, leaving the Soviets to fight a land battle with the Germans. As a result of the pre-war Communist Party purges, Russia had weakened their fighting force. The Russians also lacked experienced tank commanders and troops, and had failed to maintain their obsolete fleet, which was abandoned shortly after the war began due to a lack of fuel. However, Russia would overcome their mistakes by harnessing their massive manpower to eventually maximize their military force. Russia was later credited with marking the beginning of Hitler's decline, with their defeats of Germany on their Western Front between January and March 1942. And in August of that year, Beria, as head of the NKVD, oversaw an operation in the northern Caucasus, in which he was responsible for policing frontline deserters, deflecting subversive Nazi propaganda, punishing saboteurs, and fighting political banditry, whilst also representing the State Defense Council and reporting directly to Stalin. In the northern Caucasus, Beria had a tremendous amount of political latitude and replaced inadequate military commanders with his own NKVD officers, exhibiting Beria's inclination towards authoritarian control over his political inferiors. By the 1940s, Beria was constantly by Stalin's side and was one of his closest advisors. And it has been suggested that Beria appealed to the Soviet dictator's neurotic and paranoid traits, and was one of only a few people who could psychologically manipulate the leader, pandering to his need for praise, but also perhaps as a means to ensure his own safety, should Stalin have entertained the thought of removing Beria from his position. In May 1944, Beria was commissioned to carry out raids on counter-revolutionaries in the Soviet Union, resulting in ethnic cleansing of the Crimean Tatars, a Turkic ethnic group who sided with Germany in the Second World War. The regime sent many Crimean Tatars from their homes in the autonomous Republic of Crimea on the northern shores of the Black Sea to Uzbekistan as a means of punishment for their political dissent. Diplomatic tensions between Turkey and Russia remained high after the war, and as a result, those from the Crimean Peninsula were placed into forced labor camps, where nearly half of the Crimean population died as a result of the horrendous conditions in which they lived and worked. Following the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945 by the United States, which hastened the end of the Second World War, Stalin initiated his own atomic research, with Beria leading the operation, whilst relinquishing control over the NKVD in 1945. During his time in office, Beria had retained considerable influence in the Soviet Union, overseeing security and police operations, whilst acting as a Politburo member and as a deputy chairman of the Council of Ministers. The atomic project, however, was being conducted under a shroud of secrecy and paranoia, and delegated to trusted scientists by Stalin and Beria themselves. Soviet nuclear physicists Igor Kurchatov and Yuliy Khariton developed a plutonium implosion bomb, which was successfully detonated on the 29th of August 1949 at the Semipalatinsk test site in present-day Kazakhstan, marking the first test of the Soviet bomb project, aptly named First Lightning. Around this time, members of the Kremlin began to grow wary of Beria due to his tyrannical treatment of political rivals and the repressive nature of his political ideology. However, physicist Yuliy Khariton had a different opinion of Beria and stated in his book the First War of Physics that, quote, Beria understood the necessary scope and dynamics of research. This man, who was the personification of evil to modern Russian history, also possessed the great energy and capacity to work. The scientists who met him could not fail to recognize his intelligence, his willpower, and his purposefulness. They found him a first-class administrator who could carry a job through to completion. Due to zealous Russian secrecy, information about the Stalin regime in the years following the Second World War is difficult to find. However, one man, Milovan Djilas, a Yugoslavian communist, does give some insight into the dynamics of Stalin's inner circle in 1949, when he describes the meals they shared, in which, true to Georgian tradition, Beria would eat greens with his hands, much to the distaste of some of the gathered guests. After the meal, drinking games would take place, with those involved, including Beria, discussing politics, philosophy, as well as general anecdotes. By the 1950s, the political battle to succeed Stalin had begun, as the weakened dictator failed to hold the same grip he once did over both his allies and enemies. As his health declined, he became distrustful of the medical staff treating him, often having them imprisoned. Stalin's paranoia also extended to his closest advisors, and he even grew skeptical of Beria, but was too weak and frail to investigate him further or to have him removed from office. As Stalin lay ill in his house, assisted by his staff, Beria is said to have shown delight that his once closest ally was so near to death. But he was also seen kissing Stalin's hand as he lay on his deathbed. Once the dictator had passed away in March 1953, Beria would move quickly to control the NKVD police agency, something that was looked on with suspicion by others in the party. Concern was also mounting surrounding Beria's move to de-Stalinize the USSR, reversing many of the hardline policies put in place by the late leader. But even though this excited the Russian people, his colleagues began to grow distrustful of him, and his actions were considered to be one of the reasons for his arrest and subsequent execution. Upon Stalin's death, Beria became Deputy Premier of the Soviet Union and head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, making him the second most powerful individual in Russia behind Prime Minister Georgy Melyankov. And despite him positioning himself to become supreme leader, Beria was subsequently removed from power and charged with treason for his involvement in the opposition to Bolshevism. This was traced back to his time as a political actor during the Russian Civil War some 30 years earlier, when he was acting undercover on behalf of the state and the Communist Party. Following a bout of political maneuvering, after which Nikita Khrushchev emerged as leader, Beria was indicted on terror charges related to his purge of the Communist Party in 1941, and for trying to strike a peace deal with Hitler, after attempting to allow the German military to occupy the Caucasus region of the Middle East. Having begged for his life to be spared, whilst imprisoned at a military bunker in Moscow, Beria was tried for treason, accused of being an imperialist agent and siding with Western liberal philosophies after suggesting that Russia and the United States should enter into negotiations to end the Cold War in order to avoid the financial hardships facing Russia's increasingly unstable economy. Beria maintained that his political involvement in his alleged crimes was due to him following orders from his superiors, stating that he never intended to harm the communist government, although his words were dismissed by the court and his trial proceeded. Also made public during the trial was Beria's involvement in the kidnapping, abuse and killing of numerous young girls, largely carried out during the Second World War, when two of Beria's bodyguards who acted as witnesses, Colonel Rafael Semyonovich Sarkisov and Colonel Sardion Nikolaevich Nadaraya, stated that the former NKVD head officer would pre-select girls whilst out driving in his limousine, and insist that they be detained and brought to his mansion. Beria would abuse them after dining with them, and the bodyguards would hand them a bouquet of flowers as they left. Accepting it would mean that the liaison had been consensual. Refusal to accept would lead to their arrest. Many were killed and buried in his garden. During his trial on December 23, 1953, the 54-year-old Beria pleaded for mercy, but despite his attempt to obtain a reprieve, he was executed by firing squad, separately from the other 6 prisoners by General Pavel Batitsky. It was reported that when he realized his pleas were to be ignored, he dropped to his knees, then collapsed on the floor and began wailing. And so the general stuffed a rag in Beria's mouth to silence the once prominent figure. He was shot through the forehead, following which his body was cremated, and his remains were then buried in a forest near Moscow. Beria will forever be known as the right-hand man of one of the most brutal dictators of the 20th century, and has been the focus of much interest not only in the academic world but also in popular culture. He shared a similar background to Stalin, growing up in a time of political turmoil. But he endured those uncertain times, rising to become a senior politician in Soviet Russia, something that would normally be regarded as an impressive achievement, had it not been for the unfortunate victims of his brutal communist experiments and mass murders. He was also a ruthless and malevolent man, responsible for many crimes, whose violent tendencies overshadowed his intelligence and efficiency as an agent of the state. Following the demise of Stalin, Beria also briefly argued for liberal policies and government reform. Nikita Khrushchev once said of him that, like Stalin, Beria was an immediately likable, witty individual. But as time went on, he came to despise his political ideology, calling him a two-faced hypocrite. Furthermore, the Russian atomic scientist Katyn called Beria the personification of evil, whilst also admitting he had a sharp intellect. But whatever the case, he will forever be remembered as the Russian Himmler or the architect of terror. During his lifetime, Beria's acts secured his place among the most infamous leaders of the 20th century. In the modern world, Lavrentiy Beria is considered by many to be one of the greatest mass murderers in the history of the Soviet Union and indeed the world, as he was responsible for ordering and overseeing the deaths of millions, while at the same time he used his position to rape and murder women and even children, whose survival he held in the palm of his hand. Although he was a cunning and ruthless politician with a Machiavellian mindset, Beria's campaign of murder and fear, in the end, proved to be his downfall. Almost at the very moment he would rise to take control over the Soviet Union, he met his demise at the hands of his one-time comrades he had made his enemies. In the end, although Beria, much like Stalin, may have thought of himself as a good communist who sought to bring about the workers' paradise on earth, he found the only way that collectivization of private property could be achieved was by the forced confiscation of land, the incarceration of innocent people, forced labor, and the murder of countless millions of people. What do you think of Lavrentiy Beria? Was he an exemplary politician who would do anything to build a communist Russia? Or was he merely Joseph Stalin's hatchet man, who helped bring about the most effective and terrible dictatorship in human history, only to be swallowed by the fear and terror he helped create? Please let us know in the comment section, and in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.